Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Over the weekend, as a two-day BRICS summit gets underway, there will be intense focus on three key issues. The first two are India's relationship with the two big BRICS nations, China and Russia. In both cases, there are problems on the horizon, and the question is, can the Modi-Xi and the Modi-Putin meetings sort them out? The third key issue is terror and India's intention to raise Pakistan. How much success can Mr. Modi expect? Those are the three subjects we shall discuss today. My guests are India's former Foreign Secretary Krishnan Srinivasan, former Secretary in the MEA K.C. Singh, who joins us from the United States, the Honorary Fellow from the Center for Policy Research Sanjay Baru, and India's former Ambassador to China, Chandrasekhar Das Gupta. Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, let's start with the two big meetings Prime Minister Modi will have alongside the BRICS summit. And let's first focus on the meeting with President Xi of China. Would you agree that at this moment, from India's perspective, the Delhi-Beijing relationship is troubled firstly by China's block on India's membership of the NSG, and secondly by its block on India's attempt to get Masood Azhar recognized as a terrorist by the UN? From Beijing's point of view, the relationship is troubled by India's stand on the South China Sea. So clearly, both parties have problems with each other at the moment.
Yes, you're quite right. Of course, the basic underlying issue is the border problem, and that is the fundamental issue. But the others are important supplementary issues on which the two sides have very different perspectives.
How difficult, therefore, will the meeting be when the two heads of government sit down tomorrow?
Well, there are also areas where there are shared interests and on which there can be progress. So I think the way forward will be to try and to identify the issues where our interests match and to go forward on that, and meanwhile to gradually try and reduce the differences in areas where our views do not coincide. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight.
Krishnan Srinivasan, writing in yesterday's Hindustan Times, the scholar Srinath Raghavan says that the key problem that is presently troubling the relationship between Delhi and Beijing is, and I'm quoting him, that both countries seem to be unable to respect each other's key concerns. Would you agree? And if you do, does that suggest that they're on divergent paths and the differences could grow before they are either contained or resolved?
Well, certainly since 2014, the high hopes that were generated by President Xi's visit to India have really been belied. And I'm not quite sure it's a question of key concerns. I think that these concerns change also over the course of time. International relations are fluid, and it's necessary to be fairly agile in coping with them. I think that I would agree with Mr. Dasgupta. I think that the question now is to recognize that China's relationship with Pakistan specifically is one which is not likely to change in the near future. Pakistan is China's only ally, and I think it would be better to concentrate on the aspects where there is convergence, especially in bilateral economic matters.
In fact, is it not almost largely only in bilateral economic matters? In all other aspects, we seem to have divergence rather than convergence.
Well, not really. There's the questions like the environment, I would say, where there is a lot of mutual interest as well.
Okay. K.C. Singh, you heard Chandrasekhar Das Gupta mention briefly in his answer that the key problem, of course, is the border problem between India and China. Now, writing in today's Business Standard, former Foreign Secretary Shyam Saran says, and I'm quoting him, China no longer sees the urgency of resolving the boundary issue to enhance the strategic dimension of India-China relations. The special representative dialogue has receded into the background, even as China's activism at the line of actual control has increased. A, would you agree? And B, does this suggest that even the key issue, as Mr. Das Gupta defined it, is an area where they are making no headway?
No, very clearly, not very clearly since President Xi has taken over. There's a more assertive China. There is a closing of ranks between the president and PLA. PLA is directly under his control, much more quickly assumed control than leaders in China have in the past. Therefore, there is a degree of nationalism, and we've seen it all across the periphery. It's not just India. See what's happening in South China Sea, East China Sea, vis-a-vis almost every neighbor. There is an assertive behavior. And that is the argument which I, in a piece in the Tribune yesterday, had made, that groupings created by bankers who thought 15 years ago that these were the emerging economies and economics will determine their engagement, are being undone by serious divergences. And within the BRICS grouping, I think the balance has shifted against India, because you see a convergence between Russia and China, much greater convergence, because remember that over Syria they would like to pull you in their direction.
But to come back, Casey Singh, to India, China, would you accept Shyam Saran's point that the Chinese show no urgency in resolving the border dispute, and secondly, that their activism on the actual line of control has increased? Would you accept that?
No, absolutely. And not only activism, the old understanding was that even if I don't think India had any illusions that they'll settle the border problem overnight, but that used to be at least insulated from your bilateral relations. That is no longer there, because they are pushing their relationship with Pakistan to a level which is beginning to concern us.
Okay. Sanjay Baru, Shyam Saran also says that the real problem lies in the fact, and again I'm quoting him, that China is determined to shape the international political and economic order in a manner aligned to its interests. And he says, as a result of this, it's pursuing a new type of great power relations, and therefore it does not feel any need to defer to India. India, in other words, is losing priority in Chinese eyes.
So you want me to respond to that, Karan?
Yes, indeed. Please. Yes, Sanjay.
Well, Karan, let me preface my reply by saying that I have always been a BRICS skeptic. And it is amusing or interesting that a discussion on the eve of BRICS is about bilateral relations between India, China, or India, Russia. It is just like SAARC. I mean, I've always been a SAARC skeptic, and every SAARC summit has become one about India, Pakistan. And I'm therefore not surprised that you choose to focus on the bilateral relations on the eve of what is a meeting of a group. But I go along with that because I've always been a BRICS skeptic. On the specific question that you posed, Karan, I entirely agree with Shyam Saran. I think we do see a assertive China. China is now a much bigger economy. They have acquired a certain global influence, which is far ahead of India. And I think they would like to use this window of opportunity that they have to put in place structures that perpetuate this differential between India and China. And our interest has to be that we speed up our own development, our own growth, and not allow any emergence of any structures, international, multilateral, regional, bilateral structures that perpetuate this inequality. Because essentially, India and China are equals. We have been civilizational equals in terms of, even as economies. For a long, long time we've been equals, but the great inequality that now exists is a recent one, and I don't think we should allow China to take advantage of this situation, which might last quite long. Maybe for the next decade or two, this inequality might perpetuate itself.
Very quickly on that point, Chandrasekhar Dasgupta, you've been ambassador in China. Sanjay Baru used the words, India should not allow China to take advantage of the present inequality, which he said could last for perhaps a decade or more. Can India actually stop China taking advantage? China is 5 times India's size economically. Its influence internationally is in a league ahead of India. Can India do anything to stop China taking advantage?
Well, the Chinese perception now, the reason why they are acting much more assertively around in their neighborhood is the perception that the power differential between them and neighboring countries has increased in a major way in recent decades, and therefore the more assertive behavior. Their view is that they are second only to the United States and are fast catching up with it, and this makes them a player in a different league.
Sure.
I entirely agree with Sanjay Baru when he says that it must be the aim of Indian policy to prevent this, historically speaking, temporary period of power differential from altering in any permanent way the status of India on the global scene. This will call for very skillful diplomacy.
You know, Krishnan Srinivasan, in addition to the problems that are bedeviling Beijing-Delhi relations and the need for skillful diplomacy, the scholar Srinath Raghavan also points out, and I'm quoting him, that if there is a major standoff on the LAC, the government is likely to find itself under unprecedented pressure to take the fight to China. He therefore advises the government that there is a need to take concrete steps to demonstrate mutual restraint before the onset of a major crisis. Is that another potential threat that we need to be aware of and act to prevent?
I'm not at all sure that I agree with that doomsday scenario. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest this at all. I think there are many, many checks and balances which have been introduced to prevent exactly this kind of development taking place. I think that it's far more important, really, I'll go back to saying that it's far more important to stress the positives. When we speak of imbalance, we have to recognize also that India is in what observers have called a sweet spot. It's a spot where India has good relations with all the major players in the world, and they in turn wish to have good relations or equable relations with India. Now, these are some of the assets that India can use to check this imbalance that was referred to earlier.
All right, gentlemen, let's come to the second big meeting that Mr. Modi will have alongside the BRICS summit. This time it's the meeting with the Russian President, Mr. Putin. Sanjay Baru, would you agree that this is another troubled relationship, particularly after Russia has undertaken to send helicopters to Pakistan and after it's just conducted joint military exercises? And in a sense, the problem here was underlined when the Indian ambassador in Moscow actually expressed India's serious concerns in a formal interview to a Russian newspaper very recently.
Well, I would not exaggerate the extent of the imbalance or the concerns about the India-Russia relationship. There are elements of concern. Russia is essentially a defense exporter. With oil prices so low, its major export remains defense, and therefore Russia is desperate to sell whoever is willing to buy whatever it exports in the armaments field. But you know, recently a Russian scholar, a strategic analyst, said to me that while we, that is Russia, hold China with one hand, and you, that is India, hold the United States with the other hand, both of us should not let go the other hand with which we are holding each other. In other words, I think the game in the world today is that even as Russia moves closer to China and India moves closer to the United States, the India-Russia relationship remains a largely stable one despite some of these hiccups. And of course, Russia will sell to whoever buys equipment, Pakistan being one of them.
Let me put to you, Krishnan Srinivasan, the opposite viewpoint to the one you heard from Sanjay Baru. He says despite the fact that India and the United States are moving closer, the relationship India has with Moscow remains stable. But there is a view that in fact the closer India becomes to America and the greater the personal rapport between Mr. Modi and Mr. Obama, the greater the impact on the relationship with Putin and Moscow. Moscow perceives India as a country that's tilting westwards. And this underlies A, its concern about the relationship, and B, the way it seems to be reaching out to Pakistan. Which of the two interpretations do you go with? Sanjay Baru's or the one that underlies my question?
Well, actually, I go with both. I think there is certainly, both in Beijing and in Moscow, some degree of anxiety as to the developing relationship between the United States and India. At the same time, and that accounts for a lot of unease in those capitals, and at the same time, the relationship with Russia, except for the diaspora and except for people-to-people relationship, is about as strong as it ever was, and it's very, very multidimensional, covering vast areas of cooperation. Therefore, I do not see, by the way, I think that there is no sale of helicopters to Pakistan as yet, and I've been hearing about Russian sales of weapons to Pakistan since 1993, and they still have not happened. And it's fairly clear now, I think, that Russia does not sell on credit and the Pakistanis do not have the money to buy. So I think this is a little bit of a red herring which we can leave aside. I think that India-Russia relations are extremely stable. They have, I think, been a little neglected by New Delhi in the past, but I hope and wish that that will be rectified with this summit coming up.
Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, yesterday's Economic Times, and you find echoes of that same point in today's papers, claims that President Putin will be offered 30 joint venture collaboration proposals. The Economic Times also says that we could see agreement on the 5th and 6th reactors for the Kundakulam nuclear power project, as well as the announcement of a second site for 6 more Russian-built reactors. If this report and the quantum that it's talking about is true, does it suggest a concerted effort by the Indian side to keep the relationship smooth, sweet, harmonious and happy?
Yes, I agree with you, it does. But I think one area which the Russians will follow very closely is our growing military technology ties with the United States, and the extent to which it could affect Russian exports. Now, Russian military exports will remain high simply because of the past history of military sales to India. We'll need replacements, ammunition, and so on and so forth. But the crucial question is military technology, research and development, technology transfer. These are the crucial issues. And I think we ought to take care that we do not lose Russian options while exploring new possibilities in the West.
Now, Sanjay Baru, in contrast to what we've been saying, I noticed that in an interview that President Putin had given yesterday to IANS, which is in several papers today, he's called India, and I'm quoting him, Russia's especially privileged strategic partner. And he goes out of his way to talk not just about the defense relationship, but how India remains its #1 person or country to whom it sells. Does that sort of language, does that sort of interview suggest that Russia too is keen to bridge the differences that may have emerged and ensure that the relationship remains smooth and happy?
Absolutely, because I don't think the Russians would feel very comfortable becoming increasingly dependent on China. Russians are under pressure from the United States. So I think Russia too needs friends, and India has been a friend for a long time. And India is in fact a far more valuable and reliable friend for Russia than China can ever be. Therefore, I don't see any problem in restoring momentum to this relationship to the extent that it needs to be. I think the real problem with the India-Russia relationship is that the Indian economy has become increasingly private sector oriented, and a lot of our business is now with either the West or with Japan and Korea. There isn't enough business-to-business interaction with Russia. And as Foreign Secretary Krish Srinivasan just said, even the people-to-people interaction is not much. In my generation, when we were students, a lot of us went to Russia for higher studies, which is no longer actually true.
Very quickly, because we've got KC Singh back. We'd earlier lost that line to America, but it's back now. We've got the visual as well. A quick answer from you on the relationship with Russia. Do you believe that it has the potential to grow and that its importance to India will be as strong as it was in the critical 70s and 80s? Or do you think with Mr. Modi visibly tilting westwards and getting closer to America, Russia will diminish?
Look, there's a new balance we are trying to create, the new kind of convergence with the US So when you're rebalancing relations, each country that you have dealt with in the past will do their own numbers. And in the process, there will be irritants. There is an emerging convergence between China and Russia, which will trouble us as far as Pakistan is concerned, because, say, weapons transferred, which so far have not been transferred to China by Russia, high technology weapons, they will ultimately end up in Pakistan. And the other thing is West Asia, etc. Russia has just got unlimited lease on one of the bases there. So are we seeing a new Cold War in which China and Russia are converging, and we'll find then a relationship with US then coming under stress when you try balancing it, particularly if Hillary Clinton comes in, sitting in US, the amount of static that is coming out over Russians trying to influence the election in America. I think a Clinton presidency
but that's
may
going
really
off our subject now, Mr. K.C. Singh. Let's take a break there, because we're widening the discussion to the point where we're losing focus. I'm going to take a break and come back and turn to the second key issue we want to discuss today. What sort of attempt will Prime Minister Modi make to raise Pakistan and India's keen interest in stopping terror at the BRICS summit? Let's now come to the sort of effort the Prime Minister will make at the BRICS summit in the presence of the BIMSTEC leaders to raise India's concerns about Pakistan. Do you believe this is an important opportunity and this will be one of his key focuses when the summit gets underway tomorrow, raising Pakistan and the issue of terror?
Well, the issue of terror is Raja. I think we have concerns about terrorism as an issue in itself, and certainly that will come up at the BRICS summit. But Pakistan, I don't see Pakistan, or I wouldn't advise the Prime Minister to bring up Pakistan with anyone else except Russia. I think with Russia we need some clarity, we need some frank exchange of views. But with Brazil, I don't see Brazil playing a big role in India-Pakistan or in South Asian geopolitics. I don't see South Africa changing its view. I think South Africa has played the game both ways for a long time, and there's not a reliable leadership at the moment in South Africa. China, it's a waste of time talking to China about Pakistan. I think the Chinese have a long-term relationship with Pakistan. So it's really with President Putin that I think we need some greater clarity on what exactly they're up to. And they would also like to understand from us what we are up to with the West and etc. So I wouldn't want Pakistan to kind of dominate the BRICS summit. Terrorism certainly as a subject will.
On the issue of terrorism, Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, if it is raised with China, China will immediately interpret that as an attack on Pakistan. And if anything, China's support for Pakistan is more rigid and more solid today than it used to be earlier. So if that subject, whether it's raised in the form of terror generically or directly in terms of Pakistan, Uri, Pathankot and the surgical strikes, if that's raised with President Xi, what response would he give Mr. Modi?
No, I think in generic terms, that is on the issue of terrorism per se, he will agree with us. He will condemn terrorism. China itself has a concern about terrorism in relation to Xinjiang. So I think there will be general agreement in condemning terrorism, support to terrorism, etc. But anything which puts Pakistan in the dock, she will not accept. And so we will not have anything which is Pakistan specific in it. At most, we may get sort of an expression of sympathy or solidarity with India through a mention of the recent terrorist attack on India.
Okay. Let's then, in that case, Krishna Srinivasan, broaden our discussion and talk about terror rather than Pakistan. Now, today's Indian Express says that the National Security Advisor has already proposed to his BRICS counterparts that they need to step up anti-terror cooperation. The paper says Mr. Doval wants the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which India has in one shape or form been pushing since 1996, or maybe even earlier when you were Foreign Secretary, to be reflected in the Goa Declaration. But after it was consciously dropped at UFA in 2015, what are the chances it can be brought back in Goa in 2016?
Well, I think that the Convention on Combating Terrorism has been around in the United Nations even longer than you claim, before 1996 certainly. But, the problem with that is the question of definition. And I don't think there'll be any difficulty in the 5 countries of BRICS going along with a proposal to expedite discussions on a convention, but the devil will be in the details in the UN, and this is where it's going to get stuck for another 20 years or so, because the definition problem cannot be solved easily. Now, regarding Pakistan, I would say I would entirely agree with the previous speakers that it'd be a great shame if the Prime Minister gave the impression that we had a one-point foreign policy agenda, and that was Pakistan. I think terrorism, certainly in general terms, which everyone will agree with, but specifically dealing with Pakistan, I think no, it won't fly.
Very quickly on that issue, Krishnan Srinivasan, of the devil in the detail, how do you define terrorism? I want to quote to you what Amar Sinha, secretary in the MEA at the moment, has told the Indian Express. He says BRICS can move on terror cooperation without actually coming to a definition of terrorism, because everyone knows what terrorism is. And then he adds, when a terrorist act happens, you know exactly what is terrorism. Hence, he concludes, there's no need to define it, we all know what it is, and we can agree to tackle it. Do you accept that argument, or do you think he's just being,
well,
he's just playing with words?
I might accept that, but plenty of countries in the UN don't. So if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck to us, but not to a lot of people, because the problem here is liberation movements, and to what extent their activities would be constrained by any convention on terror. This is the basic problem.
KC Singh, in that case, how much success can Mr. Modi have in pushing terror even generically, or in getting some sort of agreement to push the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism one step forward? Is it just an effort he'll make without success, or can he hope for significant success?
See, firstly, Karan, this convention is, as Mr. Srinivasan said, it's from 20 years ago. But post-2001, the UN Security Council resolutions give enough teeth to fighting terror. The countries, those are Chapter 7 resolutions, which make it mandatory for countries to follow. And see how the Chinese are not following it by even letting us list Masood Azhar. So what definition of terror can you agree on if even on something as simple as that, the Chinese are not on board? And therefore, each one of these countries has a different driving force. At the moment, what is driving the Russians, the Chinese, and the Pakistanis together is the rise of ISIS in Syria and its reappearance in Afghanistan. And that is the Russian concern. And therefore, the minute we raise it, they'll agree in principle. But the minute you go into detail, they mean different things, and it'll involve different kinds of cooperation. So I don't know what kind of cooperation we can have with China if they don't even agree on a basic approach to a known terrorist to be listed by the Security Council.
In which case, Mr. Das Gupta, listening both to Krishnan Srinivasan and KC Singh, I get the feeling that this is a noble effort for Mr. Modi to make, but thereafter it looks more like a losing battle than a winning one.
Well, it's not a losing battle, but I don't think you will see much advance on it. You'll hold the present ground. That is what is likely to happen. And incidentally, this is also true of concerns of other parties. For example, China will not get a statement on the South China Seas, which would, fully suit its purposes. Russia will secure, most probably, some sort of statement on Syria, which is consistent with its position, lends it some support, for example, in asserting the territorial integrity, sovereignty of Syria, and so on, but which will fall short of causing offense to the West. So you have to expect that in most political areas, you are going to see statements in the declaration which make a bow towards the concerns of countries, take them into account, but certainly do not go all the way in supporting that country.
That seems
qualified support.
That seems to suggest to me that, in fact, just as Russia, with the case of Syria or China with the case of the South China Sea, India is not likely to get everything it wants. It may be a little disappointed, but perhaps not hugely so. My thanks to all my guests for joining me. There we're going to have to leave this discussion. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.